Chapter 10, 1988. In high school, prior to meeting Lee, I desperately wanted to be a pastor's wife. My reasoning was I wouldn't stray from God that way. This idea began formulating in my mind after a series of events that seemed bizarre at the time. There is a side of me that people really were not aware of because I have always tried to keep it hidden due to my desire for acceptance. My mother was raised as a Seventh-day Adventist, and so when I was a child, she took me to her church. Dad never attended with Mom, but he never kept her from attending. As I got older, maybe 8 or 9, I was worried about what other people thought of me, so I was embarrassed about going to church on a different day than everyone else. I also disliked explaining what an Adventist was and why I didn't eat pork, and would avoid sharing this information with anyone. One day, when I was about 9 years old, I was invited to attend a Baptist church on Sundays, and I guess Mom felt like a kid could never have too much church, so she allowed us kids to go. On many weekends, we kids went to church both days. A church bus would pick us up for the Sunday service, and Mom and Dad would get us off to church and then crawl back into their bed for some Z's. I was so embarrassed that I had to go to church in the first place, as this was not viewed as cool, and now I'm having to go twice a week. God got a lot of my free time when I was a kid, but I think ultimately church was good for me, as I didn't have a lot of self-esteem. It seemed at church, at least on Sunday, that everyone there was called out as an unworthy sinner, so for a change, I wasn't alone. But apparently attending gave me a chance to overcome my shortcomings through His grace, whatever that meant. I had the perception that people didn't like me. I was just a dork with generic clothes, with 2 annoying little brothers, and I understand that my parents could not put me into expensive clothes for school. I also could not have friends over to stay the night or hang out due to my father's crazy work schedule. I am not sure, even to this day, that I had any friends who would have wanted to come over. From elementary school on into junior high, there was something about me that made me more vulnerable to being bullied. I also just never quite fit in with anyone. Sometimes I would be bullied, and I learned to internalize that sadness and anger that I felt. I loathed school, and I am not sure that I ever expressed that at home. I began lying to other kids just to be cool and fit in, despite the fact that I was getting a double dose of church every weekend. I'm guessing my thought at the time was that if I had to give God so much of my time, then me lying to people at school would be no big deal. I lied about everything, so much so that I can't even remember all the lies now, when I reflect back on that time. I also started cursing when I was at school, and the expletives flowed freely enough that on occasion I would slip up at home. It was like living 2 different lives. I had my home personality and my school personality, and somehow, for a long time, I managed to keep them separate. Eventually, I moved on to high school, and I stopped going to church on Sundays because I was helping my mom with her paper route. And if you've ever seen a Sunday newspaper, they can be quite large. She took me with to help her throw over 800 of them so many Sundays. I am exhausted when I come crawling back into bed in the wee hours of the morning. Despite not always going to church on Sundays, we continue to regularly attend church on Saturdays. The class before the main church session is called Sabbath School, and this class has a profound impact on me because the teacher had an amazing way of teaching and interacting with us young adults. At Christmas, our Sabbath School class sponsors a needy family for Christmas, and we planned it out where we made them a spaghetti dinner and presented them with the dinner and a Christmas tree. I believe this experience may have changed me forever. The father in the family told us how he would go out on Christmas Eve and look for trees that had been thrown in the garbage and put it up for Christmas morning before the kids woke up. So these kids were thrilled to death to have this tree early that year. I discovered that I really loved helping those in need, and it later inspired me to run a food drive by myself at school one year for hungry kids in my own community. As time passes, that memory gradually fades into the background, and once I am old enough to get a job, I begin working and become somewhat of a workaholic. And now I'm struggling to keep up in school. I still only had a handful of friends and preferred working. I work, and whenever my employer needs someone to work extra hours, I voluntarily comply, working as many hours as legally possible. Church definitely became an unimportant priority for me. I still have my Bible and decide that you don't have to go to church to have a relationship with God, right? An interesting event occurred at the school one day. A Hispanic guy that also happened to be a very good-looking junior stood up on the table in the cafeteria during lunch period and gave a short testimonial about how God had changed his life. My first thought was, that guy is crazy. And in order to make sure I continued to fit in with the few friends I had, I blurted that thought out loud. I went on about my day, but I could not stop thinking about that guy at lunch. I was envious of the courage it must have taken to stand up and share something like that and not care about being judged by others. When I had arrived home from school, I talked about my day with my mom, and I shared that story with her, as it still remained very fresh on my mind. The next day at school, I was not thinking so much about the guy in the cafeteria and his speech the day before, when yet again another guy who was also a junior stood up on the table in the cafeteria and shared his testimony of how God had changed his life too. My thoughts this time are, what is going on with these people? Have I stepped into the twilight zone? Then I began to think to myself, there must be a reason they are doing this. Maybe they are under the influence of drugs, or maybe they're in a cult. This was not the end of the events, which I now believe were divine intervention. Most mornings, I ride the bus to school, but this Friday morning, I was running late, so mom dropped me off at school. As I was walking through the lot, a senior girl approached me and said, "Good morning, how are you?" Taken aback because most people look right past me, I respond with, "Good morning, I am okay." She responds with, "Would you like to come to a youth group at my church?" I am flattered that any senior girl even talks to me, and here is one who actually invites me to something. I excitedly say, "Yes, when is it? I will have to ask my mom though." Rhonda responds, "I will pick you up around 6:30 this evening, and it starts at 7. Here's my number so you can call me to confirm and give me your address." I was elated that a senior would even interact with me, a freshman, and I felt a boost of confidence that I felt a boost of confidence. I still had to go ask my mom for permission, but of course, she will let me go because it's church. Mom lets me go as expected with just a few questions, and off we went to her church. The church is what some would call Pentecostal, with a gospel undertone. While people there were welcoming, I was shocked at what a completely different environment this was from what I had been accustomed to. People attending included those who look like street people, gangsters, tattooed people, people in baggy clothes, and all of them are friendly and personable. The way people prayed in this church surprised me as well. My experience with prayer was that the pastor led the congregation with prayer, and then maybe a few people loudly pronounced Amen. Here, everyone prays out loud, all at the same time. Some praying what sounded like gobbledygook, but hey, I just kind of went with it. The message I had heard that evening really spoke to me, and it continued to linger fresh in my mind even after Rhonda dropped me off back at home that night. Something else happened here. I met the two juniors who had shared their testimony at church that evening. Those two guys proudly and unashamedly shared their love for Jesus, and it was then that I decided I wanted to be a pastor's wife. I didn't agree with every fundamental of this church, but a newfound knowledge of what that passion for Christ looked like had been handed to me. Yet I wasn't ready to commit to a disciplined life like that. It was like a switch flipped, and I suddenly realized I'm a sinner, and it didn't bother me before, but now, when I have the urge to sin, I'm annoyed that I know I'm sinning. The selfish side of me wanted God in my life, but on my terms.